Good morning. Everybody hear me? Okay, I love microphones. My name is Mike, November Fox 0 November. I'm the forum guy today. This is the Bicycle Mobile Hams of America Forum. This is our 31st forum. The first one was in 1990. Was anybody here for that one besides me? Anybody? Okay, usually I have one or two guys that are still alive that are from that forum, but not today. Okay, we have 1 hour today. Unfortunately, that's all we have. We've probably got enough material we could fill the whole day, but we'll do it in 1 hour's time somehow. Okay, I'm going to show how we got here. Okay, I mentioned this is the 31st one. The very first forum was 1990. It was in Hera Arena, room 7. The room was completely filled. I think there was 150 people, but it only held about 75. So it was very popular. We've had forums every year since that time, except the last 2 years when nobody came to Hamvention, and 1 year when the ARRL took all of the space when they were first starting to work with the Hamvention, so we didn't have a place we could have the forum. So what I want to do is take a few minutes to go through how we got here, how BMHA, Bicycle Mobile Hams of America, got started, where it's been, hopefully where it's going, something like today. The slide you see up here is our original founder, November Alpha Zero Alpha. In 1986 was his 50th high school class reunion. He thought it would be a kind of a fun deal to ride his bike to his high school for his class reunion. That was great. He lived in Boulder, Colorado. His high school was in Lynn, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. So I'm going to show just a few slides on how he got to where he was and what took place after that, and then we're going to have our main topic and speakers. So I've tried not to take too much time. But Hartley was an entrepreneur, had several different businesses, one including he built bags for bicycles, so he was kind of bicycle oriented. He wrote a book about cycling in Colorado. He was a photographer, a writer, and a guy that could get publicity no matter where he went, and he did that. So this is what he looked like when he started. He always was highly visible on his steel 45-pound bike. That wasn't right. Okay, whenever you take a bicycle trip, a long one like that, you got to tell the XYL goodbye. He did. Gave her a good sweet kiss there. That's when he was in Colorado. This is the route that he took. He went through Nebraska, Iowa, and all those different states there that you see. And he made friends along the way because he took his 2-meter radio along with his 5-pound charger, 4 spare batteries, a tape recorder, a weather station, and a few other things that were electronic, and he carried them all that way. I think the charger and the batteries and all the radio stuff was probably 15 pounds. It was not today's technology, obviously. But that's the route he took. You notice he went through Nebraska. That's where I live. There's Nebraska, the good life. So we took a picture while he was coming through Nebraska. There's the equipment he took with him. You can see the weight, just how much that was. Even a repeater directory. He did it on 2 meters, so that he worked all the repeaters and made friends. He would go to they'd invite him to breakfast, and they'd get all together and meet him, and it was just a friendly time when he rode. Got a little publicity in CQ magazine. Pedal power to his 50th. There he is. I think this was Sutton, Nebraska. That's him looking backwards toward us. But there's all the friends that turned out just to see Hartley riding his bicycle all the way to Boston. Crazy guy. When you gotta go, you gotta go. And there he came across the toll bridge and along the Mississippi River. I don't know exactly what that was, but he was going to cross over to whatever the next state is. Made it to Ohio. So you know if he took the picture, he had to be there. There he is. And there's the rest of his trip. Once he got to Ohio, he went up through, kind of followed the lake up there, went across New York, and was headed towards Lynn, Massachusetts, which is right there, almost on the ocean, Boston. Made it to Pennsylvania, New York, good old New York. I lived there for a while, never did like it. Okay, there's the rest trip. He's getting closer. Now this trip took him, I believe it was just a couple days short of a month when he did it. I have some pictures, but I'm not showing them today, where he did his statistics, where he wrote. He showed how many days of headwind he had, how many hills he climbed. He admitted that he walked his bike up several hills. Never admits you walk a bike up a hill. But he did. He was honest. And he showed some of the other statistics too, you know, where he stayed and all this kind of stuff. Since he talked to all these people along the way, a lot of people sent him QSL cards. That's his there on the bottom. There's one from New York, and WA0BOK, who happens to be was a very good friend of mine in Nebraska, so I was glad to see that card. He did walk a hill. He admitted it. I don't know who took the picture, but he's walking his bike. Okay, there he is waving to his high school. When he got to Lynn, Massachusetts, he waved at that a couple of times and took a couple of passes. He told me once personally, he said, Mike, there was one hill when I was a kid in my hometown of Lynn I could never climb. He said, I climbed it at age 67. He said, I did it and I was the proudest man in the world. Okay, he got publicity. Right there's the local newspaper in Massachusetts. He made it to his class reunion. Kind of a hero's welcome, he said. When you're done, you got to go home. And that's how we got BMHA started. After he did this, he then had the forum in 1990. And he had a sheet of paper that he said, asked if any volunteers would be interested in forming a bicycle club for hams who ride their bicycles. And that's how we got started. I think it originally started with about 150 members. And this club has existed clear up until today. For about 10 years, we had monthly newsletters. Everybody paid $10 to help pay the postage. We had enough people to write articles. Went for about 10 or 11 years. I happen to have brought about a dozen CDs that have all of those newsletters on them. Even though they're dated, there's a lot of good articles in there and pictures with how to mount antennas on your bike, how to mount things on your bicycle that are radio related, handhelds, antennas, mounts, all that stuff. I only brought about 10 or 11. If you're interested in one, they're up here. I have a donation envelope. Right now, BMHA does not charge any dues. Everybody is free. You can sign up and join to get in the database in case we have emails going out or want to get contacts with people. But we don't charge any dues. We don't really ask anybody for money. We're still existing on the money that Hartley Alley raised during his lifetime. We've used that money judiciously. We only spend it on postage, any other expenses we might have, which are minimal. 2 people run the group, myself, I'm still the secretary treasurer. Skip, AA6WK in California, runs the website, and there's a database where he keeps track of the members. You can join. I've got some membership applications up here if you want to get on the list for the database. And then there's also another sheet that talks a little bit about BMHA and has the website and the address for that, and also for Google.io groups. We have a group called BMHA. And there's quite a bit of activity on that. Even though we don't take don't have membership dues or anything like that, there's still quite a bit of activity on that particular forum. And there's lots of good ideas. You can ask questions on there. People that look at it will answer. And there's some pretty good people out there that have mounted things on their bicycles. So feel free to use those two things. Anyhow, those sheets are up here. I'll have somebody start passing each one around. And if you're interested in the CD, they're in this little white box up here. Okay. So we have one, I guess I call him a professional speaker because he's done that about, I don't know how many years he's been speaking and bringing his bicycle and talking about how he puts things on that bike, stuff I've never even considered. So I like what he does. And every time I need a speaker for the forum, I contact him and he says yes every time, poor guy. Does a great job. I'm not exactly sure what town he's from, but because he rides everywhere. But Steve D'Amico, do I have the call right? KC8, QVO. Yep, I won't use the phonetics. Okay, KC8 QVO. Is David King here? Not yet. Okay, I had one more person that I wanted to have say a few words. If he shows up, I'll have him do it. But I don't see him yet. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Steve. We've got until at least 10:15, maybe 10:25 for our time frame. So while he's starting, I'll pass out these other things. And thanks everybody for coming. It's good to see everybody.
How is everybody? Glad to be back at Hamvention again after the 2-year dry spell.
Yeah, but the campground I normally go to got bought out by people who do not know how to run a campground.
That's not any fun.
Yeah, it's a gigantic mess.
Adventure Cycling magazines are here. Anybody can take it.
Yeah, there are adventure cycling magazines that are up front on the top row of seats, front row seats. If anybody wants them, they're free for the taking. Get that closed out. Okay, so as we get going here, one thing I'll mention is that cycling for me is always an adventure, as is a lot of things in life, whether that's going out to eat at a new restaurant or just trying a new activity. For me, it's all about an adventure. This presentation I didn't really rehearse, I just kind of put it together, so it's an adventure for all of us this morning. So we'll go on that together. In 2020, during the pandemic shutdowns, I ended up running the Ohio to Erie bike route, which is from, if you do it south to north, it's from Cincinnati to Cleveland, or the Ohio River up to Lake Erie. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but the two main topics that I had, the first one is trip planning, talking about elevation and distance data. So if you're thinking about going on a bike trip, a lot of times people question, well, how far can I go in a day, or where do I go, generally speaking, what area of the country, or where would you like to go for a ride? And then you can dig into that a little bit deeper and find exactly how you're going to get there. So what specific routes that you want to take, and if they're safe to ride, etc. So that's a lot of what we'll talk about. I do have a YouTube channel. It's QRP to QRO. There's 2 videos up there actually on my Ohio to Erie bike trip. A lot of it relates to gear and the setups. So if you would like to jot those down, you can watch those at a later date. In the description of those videos, I do have timestamps of what sections or whether it's camping gear or clothing or food, whatever. They're all organized in there. So again, as far as bike trip planning goes, a few of the main questions: how far can I go in a day? Where should you ride? What general location? And then again, the more specific routing. So do you want to take a 2-lane major state highway, or do you want to take a multi-use path or a conventional rail trail that's meant for biking and multi-use? So a few of the tools that I use, I'm actually going to do this live too, so we'll break away from the slideshows a little bit as we go. But Strava is one of the main tools that I do use. That's an online repository for your personal information, so you can tie that in with a bike computer. And the way that I have it run through my system is every time that I stop the bike computer, it actually automatically uploads through my phone out to Strava, which is a fantastic way to collect that information and host it for later viewing. So I'll try to get my internet connection going here. The other aspect of Strava that's really nice, and I'm going to show that to you here first, is the heat map. How many of you actually have heard of Strava? Does anybody use it? Okay, there's quite a few of you guys actually. Well, that's a good thing. Let's see if we can break away from this. There we go. So this is what the main heat map looks like, and what this is, in fact, if you go out to, I won't do it right now, but if you go back out and reload this page, it comes up with a pop-up that tells you how they collect the data. It's a rolling 2-year set of information. So everybody that uses a bike computer that is set up to record data and link it through Strava, it will collect that information and generalize it and display it, and that's what we see here is the intensity of traffic on certain routes, and the higher the traffic, the brighter the lines or the light that you see. I'll bring this up too. Look at the contrast just for a quick look of Europe versus America. So the density is just astronomically more in Europe. But going back to the question of generally where would you like to ride, this is a great tool. If you look at this elevation level, you can start seeing these brighter lines, like one across Iowa. There's one across Missouri. If you scroll down a little bit, there's the Notches Trace. How many have heard of the Notches Trace bike path? Yep, there's a couple of you. So you can see that it goes from is that Nashville, Tennessee, down to Notches, Mississippi. It's not quite as intense as some of the other lines. The Gap in CNO, Pittsburgh to DC. Anybody heard of that one? That shows up here, going down through Maryland. You've got the Ohio Erie Canal Trail Network that goes through New York. So there's a lot of things that you can see at this elevation. If you scroll in a little bit, you can see the Ohio to Erie that diagonally slices through Ohio. Anybody in here from Ohio? A couple of you? Ever heard of the Bermuda Triangle? You know, we have an Ohio Triangle. Do you know that? If you zoom in a little bit, you can see here's the Ohio Triangle. Urban legend has it that several riders have started that and never returned. If you look, there's even a dead spot in the data. But no, that's a joke. I just no, but it is interesting to look at the map and all the information you can see. The fact that technology has got to the point where you can do this, it's great. But going back to the question of routing and what rides you want to do, or if a road is safe to ride on, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, then use this map and check and see if anybody or if there's a higher amount of traffic on one route versus another, and then those would probably be the first ones I would dig into. But we'll get to that in a little bit because I'm going to continue on with some of the other tools that get back into the same, answering the same questions there.
Is this also getting information from the authorities and stuff like, oh, that's a great route, except we just closed it for the next 3 days?
What I have heard as far as the data that Strava was collecting early on was for municipalities to try to prioritize where to put in multi-use paths and sidewalks. So they were trying to collect that data, but when you look at it from a more of a hobby aspect or a fitness aspect of riding, there's a lot of use that all of us can get out of it. So.
I know we got the trail that goes through, and there really isn't a good about E2 or E5, and they have to take the bridge out. And somehow or other, the bikers have been so active, I know that there was a lot of information, sites like this, perfect route that ends with no bridge for the next month. And I was wondering, are they trying to acquire this information? Is there ways and places to actually put that data in?
Yeah, that I can't answer. I'm not real sure. Actually, the Ohio to Erie, if you go down south into Cincinnati, just north of Cincinnati, they've got Sunken Lunken, the old airport. Well, there's a bypass that they've been working on for probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It's been in the planning stages, but they're finally putting in a bridge that goes up and over the river down there, so you don't have to take that detour out by the old airport. So I think that's supposed to be completed this year. But again, it goes back into the question of routing and what, how you find which way to go. If you have something that is closed off and blocked off, you need to reroute and get yourself around it. So another tool that is extremely useful is Ride with GPS. It's an online mapping system. Oh, there it is. I had it out already. Looking for my note sheet. Like I said, we're going on an adventure. Let me see which of the examples I want to show you guys. Okay, so Ride with GPS. If you're familiar with the Garmin style bike computers with GPS and routing capabilities, you can import files to that. And Ride with GPS is one fantastic way that you can do such. So we'll pull up a couple here. And if we go back to the question of multi-use paths and bike paths as far as taking those instead of roads, I'll show you this example here. Oh, that's our TDT. There we go. Of course, I'm trying to find it fast and I'm skipping right over it. There it is. So part of this does fall on the Ohio to Erie route. This was part of a ride that I did back in, I think that was 19. So if we zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that there's other colors in here. There's blues and greens. The blue and green refers to the different trail networks. So if you're going through a particular area, then you can click on these lines and you can draw your line segments, and that will create your path. And you can designate those instead of taking the roads. So I think in this particular route, I actually shaved off maybe 3 or 4 miles of riding on the roads to bike trails. And a lot of those I had never rode on before and never even knew that they were there until I came to Ride with GPS and then ended up mapping that out. So that can save a lot of, if you don't like riding on the roads per se, dealing with the traffic and whatnot, that can save a lot of road time just in that. And one other note too with the ride with GPS is I have found that to be extremely up to date, at least for Ohio. So a lot of times I found in that it even has updates in there that Google Maps doesn't even show yet, which I think we're going to get to Google Maps and Bing Maps next. Yep. So a couple things that are really good to use with this mapping type of online system is both the satellite view and the street level or trail level, which as time progresses, there is more and more coverage of the street level view on bike trails and multi-use paths. So we'll go out and check those real fast also. And again, just for discussion's sake, we'll zoom into Ohio, since that's what I'm most familiar with, but you can do this for any area. So change the layers. I always like using the satellite map, and then we can also overlay the biking layer, which brings up all different types of trails. You'll see those highlighted in the neon green. And one I want to zoom into is around Urbana. I'll show you that in just a second as to why. So there's our trail, and you'll notice the designation on Google Maps even shows this. You have the solid neon green for the paved trails, and then you have the dashed neon green for the unpaved or dirt trails. And if we go to the street level or trail level, it highlights, so we can drop our little man dude right on there. And now we're looking at the trail. And one thing I will point out, there it is right there, is this image is from 2016. And I've actually walked this. We did that last fall just to scope things out, because this is part of another loop ride that I want to do here in the not too distant future. But this section of trail was actually covered with chip and seal. So it's not fully asphalt, but it's not loose gravel either. So sometimes you have to take what Google Maps shows you with a grain of salt. Like I said, this is from 2016, the imagery, but that trail surface has actually been upgraded since then. But if you want a basic overview, check the image capture date and then zoom in on it if it has the option to do so, and you can check out those areas. So there's a lot of other information that you can find if you find a park or a church or something that has a pavilion. Go down to the trail level and check out the facilities there before you embark on your trip. Go back to our slideshow. So a couple of important points to bring up too with the mapping and the routing is one of the main questions you're trying to answer is a particular road or route safe to ride? A couple things to think about. If you're way out in the boonies and you're on a deserted 2-lane road, you probably don't have a whole lot to worry about. On the Ohio to Erie Trail, that would be like up around Dalton, Apple Creek. There's a lot of road sections in there that are pretty hilly, but it's all Amish country. So there are some, tractors and things you have to watch out for, but it's not Route 42 through Plain City. So a couple things. When you're looking at the general areas, those state routes, do they service any industrial areas, mines, gravel pits, cement factories, logging tracks, anything that's serviced by a lot of truck traffic? That's really no man's land for bike riding. Even if there was that type of activity in an area that I was going to, then the two options I would have are either go at odd hours when they're not probably out there, or find an alternative, even if it takes you a day or two out of the way, just to get away from some of those high traffic areas. So we'll get into historical data and tracking that. There's the saying that what goes up must go down, but in riding, it's more important that what goes down must go up. So if you look at my arrow here, that was crossing a valley. I think that's the Scioto Valley. So you may be cruising downhill with the wind in your hair and going 15, 20 miles an hour like nothing, but it's going to catch up to you on the other side because you got that hill to go back up to climb out of the valley. And especially if you're loaded, you're going to be out there for a while. Of course, the more weight that you have, the slower and tougher that's going to go. Even Mike mentioned Hartley walked up a few hills. We all do that from time to time. So I'll show you my my spreadsheet here. There's a couple of ways we'll get into in a second for determining, again, answering that question, well, how far do I go in a day? A lot of it comes down to fitness level and what you're comfortable with riding. And what I do, I've been doing this since I started distance riding. I guess that was back in 14 maybe. But I collect all of my ride data in a spreadsheet. I know Strava does that automatically, but you know, I'm kind of old school, I guess, and I like going back to the data. But I like collecting the mileage, the time, average speed, average cadence, and the maximum cadence, maximum speed, and then the elevation. The fan just kicked on behind me. Can you guys still hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Do you have a question? Or are you good? Okay. So with the data collection, that's the way that I go back in history. Sometimes I take notes, but a lot of the bigger rides, like the ones down here that you see in this season, that are 20 miles, that's a fairly routine ride that I've done. So I know which way I'm going and which way the elevation is. I have a comfort level with the amount of gear that I have versus what that ride is, what my fitness level is, and what that does to me. So, you know, a lot of the rides that I've done in the past, if I do day trips, like Delaware State Park is a place I've gone to quite a few times. Those rides are usually like 54, 55 miles. So, you know, as far as if I'm in shape, then I know that distance and the elevation on that, because it's a routine ride, I know what to expect. But when I'm in shape, that is, for me, that's about the most amount of miles that I'd want to do in a day with a load, but I'm comfortable with that. So for me, it's a good benchmark. And that's what we're trying to do, is find some way that we can collect information and have our own benchmark, because what might be acceptable for me might be different for you or anybody else. Ride your own ride, figure out what's comfortable for you, and that's the main thing with the data. So once we have that data, then how do we start looking at that and progressing with it, and how do we go from data to a route? Yes. Yes. That's the total amount of climbing feet on that ride. I don't have the descending elevation in there because it doesn't really matter. Like I said, if you're flying downhill and you got the wind in your hair, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is the gain. So there's two ways, we'll get to that in a minute. There's two ways that you can figure out. One of them is the climbing index that we'll get to in a minute. Excuse me. But once you figure out what that correlation is between distance and elevation, that's kind of your main guide to answering that question of how far can I go in a day. If you have 1,500 feet of gain and you're only going 12 miles, or you have 1,500 feet of gain and you're going 300 miles, major difference. So you need to know that ahead of time, and I'll actually show you, coming up pretty quick, I'll show you an example of that as to what kind of taught, it didn't really teach me that lesson, it kicked it in my rear end. Where are we? There we go. Okay, so the first example that I'll bring up is an early ride that I did in 2019. This is actually my first overnight, if you want to call it that. It wasn't supposed to be that, but it ended up being that just because of timing and whatnot. So this ride for that day was right at 71 miles, and we have an elevation gain of 745 feet. The data from this, actually, I did screenshots from Strava. If we have time, I don't think we will, but we may go out there and look at some of those live. But what I want to show on this is the graph on the bottom. So you can see, yeah, the 745 feet, to some it may sound like a lot of elevation, but you also have to take into consideration the distance. So if you look at the elevation profile, it's fairly flat. There is up to about, I don't know, around the 45-mile mark. It's generally going up, increasing in elevation, and then it flattens out and starts going down a little bit. So I know from riding this when I did, to me that amount of elevation and that mileage was okay. I was comfortable with that. So we get to day number 2, and this is kind of the kick in the shorts. If you look at the mileage first, we're at just under 18 miles with about 400 feet of elevation gain. Well, the Ohio to Erie Trail, this section of it is built on an old train track or train bed. So of course trains don't like hills, right? So most of the time the rail trail networks like that, they're always going to be on relatively flat ground. If you get off of that and you have to wind through town a little bit, sometimes there is some up and down. But in this case, I wasn't staying on the trail. I was actually going somewhere, so I had to divert off the trail close to where I was going and then go up into town. Well, in that area, that's the Miami River Valley. In that area, as soon as you get off the trail, pretty much the elevation shoots up on both sides. So you'll notice that here in the elevation profile. And if we overlay some numbers on top of this, you'll see even in one spot there's a 16.1% grade. You want to talk about walking up a hill? Try pulling a bike with about 100 pounds of stuff on it, going up that kind of a grade. It's that was a tough day. And the interesting thing, again, going back to the data, I didn't take into consideration all of these details at that time, and that's why I'm using this as my presentation topic to try and give a real example of that, because I did maybe what somebody just basically starting out would do is look at the map and say, okay, well, I want to get from here to here, and there's my trip. There's a little bit more to it, because if you come across something like this grade and you're not expecting it, that may add a day or two to your trip. So it's not necessarily the end of the world, but if you don't route plan and you don't factor that into where you're going, that can be a big issue. So another example, one thing I'm trying to work into is using a bike trailer for a number of reasons, but that'll take a lot of the weight off the bike for one, but it gives me a lot more options as far as electronics and radio stuff goes. So that's a topic for another time. But this particular ride was one of those 20-mile runs with about 385 feet of elevation. And you can see from the elevation profile on the bottom, it is relatively flat, but looking at the numbers, it does generally slope up. So I know from riding that ride, that is doable. So when I'm in good shape, that is in the realm of possibilities for my riding. There is my bike setup on that particular ride. Yes. What kind of trailer do I use? So Interesting question, because somebody gave me an old kid trailer from, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. So I borrowed parts off of that, like the wheels and how it connects to the frame. I guess it'd be the axle, and I kind of made my own frame and everything for it. But I bought, in fact, here at Dayton, maybe 15 years ago, I got a set of those aluminum military tent poles to make a mast. Well, I used 2 sets of 2 with duct tape in the middle to join them together as a frame, and then I have a hitch on it. So I've got the wheels in the back, and then I have the hitch in the front, and then I put 2 big plastic totes on it. So that's what I'm using right now. It's just more or less a test, but it does the job. So this ride here is part of the Ohio to Erie, and yeah, this was day 4 on the first leg of the trip, and on this day there was 26, a little under 27 miles, but if we look at our elevation, it's 1138. So this was, you know, for me, that was definitely a lot of miles, or a lot of elevation over those miles for a day. So if I was route planning for me, then this would be something that I would try to stay away from, that much elevation. But having that data to go back to and look at, I know in my mind, in my history, what this number was for me. So now we'll talk about the climbing index real fast. What that is essentially is you divide the elevation gain by the mileage. So you can do it for miles or kilometers. It only takes into account your average though. So if you go back to the ride that I did where it was flat for quite a while and then it shot straight up, you're missing some of that, that information. So that's why I think it's more important to look at in detail the elevation profiles. And going back to ride with GPS, you can actually find that, because as you're doing that, that routing, as you make your line segments, it does show you what that is. So as far as actual numbers for a climbing index, for the Ohio to Erie trip, if you do that continuously and you just stay on the trail, that's 6,255 feet of elevation gain over 325 miles, or about a 19 with your climbing index. If you look at day 4 of my trip, that climbing index shot up to 42. So for me, yeah, that's on the high side. And then this I'm actually going to do live instead of on the slideshow. But this is the, I guess you could say it's the next trip that I have in the back of my mind that I want to do. When I will get to it, I don't know, because I thought I was going to do it last season too. Excuse me. So if we look at this this ride, you can see the elevation profile on this one does have some higher peaks on it. So the thing that catches my eye right off the bat is this this higher peak. So I think that's like 23 or 25 miles. We're low on time?
We take a short break.
Yep.
And I'll bring him up for about 5 minutes or so.
Okay, yeah, we're going to take a quick shift of gears.
I'm going to take a real quick break. I'd like to bring up David King, who would like to talk about his cross-country trip. We'll give him a few minutes to talk. He's also written a book, and I told him he can promote the book as much as he wants. And then we'll go back to the other presentation. I don't know Dave very well. I just met him yesterday. I'll let him tell him about himself.
Hi, my name is David. Is the audio good, or should I? Sorry. I'm David, AA2KV. I grew up in New York. I now live in Chicago. So I rode my bicycle across the country from San Diego to Miami. It took about 3,600 miles, took me 4 months to do. And for those who are sort of geography nerds like I am, I can tell you that I went from San Diego across to El Centro, California, over to Yuma, Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson, Wilcox, over to Lordsburg, New Mexico, Deming, Las Cruces, El Paso, Texas, Marfa, Alpine, San Antonio, up to Austin, Houston, over to Beaumont, Orange, then over to Lake Charles, Louisiana, Lafayette, New Orleans, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, and Pensacola, Florida, over to Tallahassee, down to Tampa, Clearwater, Fort Myers, across over to Clewiston, and then somehow, I'm not sure how, through the Florida Everglades, over to Boca Raton, Deerfield Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. So it was an amazing trip. I'm really grateful for all the kindness I received from people along the way. And if anyone wants to nerd out about that, I'm happy to talk to you and give you details. I do have a book that I've written called America on Two Wheels, Biking Coast to Coast in Search of Human Stories about the interesting people I met along the way. So if you'd like that, we're all friends here. If you'd like an ebook copy, I'll send you an ebook copy for free. If you'd like a hard book copy, I can give it to you for cost. But I'm also up here because I'd like to get inspired from you all, because you all are here because you're into bicycling and ham radio. I have a Yaesu FT530 dual band HT that I mount on the handlebar, either with a speaker mic or a boom headset. I even was able to wire in an external PTT that you loop around the handlebar and just press with your thumb. But I'd like to learn from you, and I'd like to get inspired for the next generation. I do want to upgrade to digital. I don't know much about the modes. So if you all have any opinions on DMR versus D-Star versus Fusion, whatever it is, I'd like to learn from you. Bluetooth earpiece, headset, Bluetooth PTT, any of that stuff, even some kind of portable HF unit with, and an antenna I could mount on the back. So I'd love to talk to you in person when we have some time. So if you have any questions, otherwise we can just speak in person later. So thanks.
Where's Mike? How much time do we have? About 20 minutes? Okay. Okay, so we left off with the 145-mile 4-day loop that I've got in the works here in the future. But again, going back to this higher peak on the elevation chart, that's really what catches my attention. And if we zoom in on that, then what we have is 671 feet of elevation over 28.5 miles. So I know that that's based on my history again, and everybody's history is going to be a little bit different. But for me, that elevation over those miles, that would be a tough day, but it'd be doable. But what I want to know is, what does the day prior look like? Because am I going to have one heavy day, or am I going to have 2 heavy days back to back? So we're looking at the same thing pretty much on the day before at just under 29 miles and a little over 600 feet of elevation. So I know as I even begin thinking about that particular trip, that there's going to be a couple of heavy-duty days in there that are probably going to take me some time to get through. Yes. Good question. Sometimes those are bridges where the elevation data actually drops down to whatever the bottom is in that area, or it's just a glitch in the system. I think most of the time, as it shows up here, if it's uniform like that, it's usually a glitch in the system. But that's a good question, because if you look at the gap, the Great Allegheny Passage, they have tunnels. You see the same thing that go through the tunnels because they don't have the peak of the mountain that they're actually going through and not up and over.
Requires cell service? No GPS now. GPS?
The bike computer will still track the data because you still have the computer or the sensors on your bike. So you will lose the GPS component, but it's still keeping track of your cadence, speed, and distance and those metrics. So with the time that we have left, I'll go through a couple of pictures of the Ohio to Erie trip I did and some of the gear that I take. This is a collage of not exactly every day's ride on my trip, but that kind of gives you an idea of the southern point, the northern point. I did miss going through Columbus because I diverted, and that's where I was riding in and out of was northwest Franklin County. So I did my trip over 2 sections. I went up north first, and then took about a week off, and then I went down south and did the southern route. So I'll just go ahead and pull up some pictures here. And like I said, this presentation is kind of an adventure. I didn't really rehearse a whole lot other than jotting some notes down and whatnot. So as far as pictures, we're just gonna let it roll. If I can find them. So before I even took off, I did a test ride. It was, I don't know, 15, 20 miles. And I was just experimenting with hanging gear on the bike and what to take. I got to talk about that. So when I started riding, I was using platform pedals. I didn't have any clips that would attach my feet to the pedals. I guess they're technically called clipless. But I was pushing on the pedals, and all that did was build up the muscles and tendons on the top of my legs. I didn't balance everything out. Ended up with pretty bad knee issues because those muscles and tendons pulled my kneecaps off to the sides. So I went through 6 or 8 weeks of physical therapy to try to straighten things out, switched to the clipless pedals with the shoes that attach to the pedals. And that's one of the things that keeps me able to ride and go long distances. That doesn't mean that I don't have to still do some maintenance. That's what this is. If you're familiar with foam rollers and rolling out muscles and tendons, I just did the same thing with some foam packing over top of an Nalgene bottle just to kind of condense everything and have a multi-use tool with me. So I would do that every day. At night, in the evening, I'd find just an open spot on the trail and I'd roll my IT bands out. And that's what kept my legs in good shape. That was an experiment with the antenna on there. The main radio that I use on the bike as I'm going is a Yaesu VX6R dual bander. And in this setup, I just had a dual band whip on there, which when I went on my ride, I changed that out for a quarter wave. And you can see the ground plane on there, so it's just a couple of quarter wave radials. And you always have to be aware that you may have gear issues. In fact, Rebecca and I were riding last week and that same thing happened. Bolt came out of the pannier. I did add a mirror to the bike before I went on my trip just so I could see behind me. But as it turned out, that was one of the upgrades I did on the second leg of the trip, was I extended this out about another 8 inches. Because the stuff on the bike was blocking the view of the mirror, so I needed to get around that. I did ride in cold weather because it was in October and November, so I had some cold temperatures to deal with. And I made these goofy aluminum plates that zip tie to my shoes that have the SPD clip on them, so I could use my winter hiking boots and still attach them to the pedals. And again, that's as goofy as it looks, it works like a champ. I rode all but maybe 1 or 2 days of all my trips with those boots, and it worked out fantastic. Just some of the food that I took. A solar panel that I was trying to rig up to tent poles. I actually didn't use this on the trip because I ended up using the tent so much I needed the poles. So it was just, it was too much to try to ride and have that going at the same time. That's part of the system I showed a couple years ago, my portable power system. This was the first night, I'll talk about this actually, that's my coffee brewing method. I use a plastic water bottle, coffee filter, and a zip tie, and then I just put the grounds in it. I used to make big tea bags. I stapled the coffee filter shut with the coffee in it, and that actually was a little bit more work as far as dishes go because you're making the coffee in the pot. This keeps the dishes down because you can just boil water and then all your messes there in the bottle and the coffee filter. So that's why I like that method. Then you can just a lot of times just trail side, to be honest with you. I just it goes back to how far I can ride in a day. So just it depends on what the area is and what, you know, you wouldn't want to be necessarily doing that on a park bench all the time, but if you got to a particular spot and that was your option.
I just thought it might be something different than what I do.
Yep. One of the neat things about trips like this too is, of course, being in the outdoors. I always enjoy being in the outdoors. There you can see the sun coming up in the first morning. And of course, I had to harvest some photons. And then pancakes in the morning for breakfast. That square skillet actually was my great-grandpa's, so it has a lot of sentimental value. I enjoy taking that on all my camping trips. Then my recliner chair, that's awesome. This is my meter that shows the solar output. So we were running about 13.5 volts, just under an amp of charge current, or 13.3 watts. So that wasn't too bad. Sometimes I can get up to, in really hot sun, I can get up to about 1.5 amps. But an amp, that's on a good day, that's good. This is just an example of the bike with all the gear on it. So I did have quite a bit of stuff.
How much is all that weigh?
If I was to guess, on a resupply day, if I had a couple of jugs of water too, probably close to 200. So that's actually an interesting point. One of the important things about doing the test ride before is knowing how to attach the gear and making those adjustments so you can actually ride the bike. If you have if you have the weight too high, it's off balance. The bigger issue is you can actually get the wobble going on in your steering. So you try to get that weight down low, it actually stabilizes things really nice. What's weird is when you get used to riding the bike with all the stuff on it, when you set up camp and then you go to the porta-john in the camp, downways a little bit with an empty bike, you can't hardly ride an empty bike because you're so used to jerking that thing around and you throw yourself right off of it. Been there, done that. That was just one of the pavilions that was next to the trail. And then another day I was set up there, I had my laptop and my AC power inverter running the computer off my solar. I'll just expand that out. Okay, I did want to point this out too and correlate that to, I believe, Ride with GPS. Because this is one of those high peaks that you see on the trail. Actually, we'll go out to Strava. We'll see, we'll do a live example of the data collection on Strava. October 18th. So here's the data output from that same file on the bike computer we were looking at a second ago. And you can see right here on the map in the elevation chart, that's where that high peak was. So it is kind of interesting. Again, like I said, we're going on an adventure this morning together here. When I look back at the data, this is that hill on the trail, and then cresting it. And then you can see that on the bike computer. And there's our total elevation at that point in time. And this is one of the other spots I stopped. One of the interesting things in this trip is how wet it was. It rained pretty much all but maybe 3 or 4 days of the time I was out. So I took 2 shelters with me. I had the tent, which is the blue thing, and then I had a hammock, and the tarp, or the cover for the hammock, is what I use most of the time as my garage for the bike. I also use that as a cook shack in the morning or in the evening to brew up dinner and lunch. So there's my protected camp setup. And then when I packed up that morning, that's everything on the bike, all nice and soaked, including me. And this is part of the road section around Apple Creek. I guess that's south of Dalton. But it was misty and pea soup that entire day, and as you can see, lots of hills. So that's what it was pretty much that entire day. And then I ran into this interesting road closure. I thought, let me at least ride down there and see if I can find a way through. And this is in Amish country, and one of the interesting things about the Amish, at least in Ohio, a lot of them have adopted the idea of electric bicycles. So you see a lot of them out there riding bikes. And I actually, I didn't realize that, and I thought a couple of them were bike tourers also. Time? Okay. Well, I guess that is going to be it for the presentation that I had. So real quick, I will put one last slide up that has my information if anybody wants to check things out at a later time. If you have questions, email me or check out my YouTube channel. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve and Dave, for a great program. I wish we could have had another hour, but I couldn't get it. So we will see you either on the air, on the trails, or next year, if I'm still here. Thanks all for coming. I will be at the back door if anybody is interested in the CDs of that I've got up here. I'll just be at the back door so I can let the other people come in. Thanks again. Everybody have a safe trip home.